Hi, this is 52 Miniatures, and the video is sponsored by Corvus Belli. I've just built this little ruined farmstead, and it cost me nothing, not even blood, sweat, or tears. I'm going to use this for Warcrow, a great fantasy skirmish game with lovely models. And it's all built from fibrous cereal packaging, and cardboard of probably a similar flavor. Now, to continue, we need to endure just a little bit of storytelling. See, I busted my knee. It's super impractical. I really need functional knees for my work. Ruling over minions requires getting to the top of the tower. There's such things as appearances, after all. And besides, the former Dark Lord forgot to install a lift. So, accepting defeat, I retreated to the secret hideout in the woods to recover. It was nice and relaxing for about 5 minutes and then, well, boring. So I thought I'd paint some minis. Only I forgot to pack them, didn't I? So what's the next best thing? Crafting terrain. What kind of terrain can I build from whatever I can find around the house that would also be, well, universal? Materials found in probably most homes. And that's free. Yeah, welcome to socialist crafting. Thing is, I've built structures out of cardboard before, and it's not great. It warps when wet, i.e. when the paint gets on it. It's got a wave-like structure, not always what I want, and it's got a rather fragile surface. Now, cereal packaging, however, is beautifully flat, rather resilient, and bends nicely. But it's way too thin for major construction. And this is when I discovered, there's bound to be someone else who was first, but call me Cook or Columbus, Galilei, Watt, Tasman, Edison, regardless, this is when I discovered the best, free, available to all construction material. When I glued the two materials together with PVA/white glue. I could start building a house. I studied the original Warcrow starter box terrain. I love starter boxes that actually include terrain, but I love homemade terrain even more. So I took some measurements, made a simple mock-up, checking scale and the feel of the size in relation to the miniatures. Cut many a piece of wonder material, not cutting my finger once. No blood, remember. And I got to about this. Before my minions called and said they were hungry and no one was around the tower to feed them. Where was I and when was I coming back? Better come now before we start eating the paint. Next time I'll have to remember to stock up the tower supplies with instant noodles and stick one of the neighbors in the freezer. But it was probably for good, not only for the neighbor, but because now I can explain properly how to make these tabletop buildings and how to get the most out of the free materials around us. I used cereal packets because 2 Weetabix a day keeps the bowel happy, and at my age this is high priority stuff. Hence, there's a lot of boxes around. But similar type of packaging can be found outside of the fiber sphere, like this Warcrow miniature packaging, for example. Personally, I had no issues with the wonder material I made, but here are some potential troubleshooting tips if your cardboard and packaging does not glue itself together properly. Kitchens can be a greasy place because of fried bacon-addicted minions, and hence any packaging originating from the kitchen should be checked for grease and wiped clean, if needed. I glue the side with the print on facing the cardboard, leaving the untreated side facing out. I don't know how the printed side is treated, however, wax or plastic or something. There is a possibility this surface won't adhere well to the cardboard depending on what you're using. A quick rub with a rough sandpaper should help if this is an issue. Now, when it comes to designs, I chose to do some more buildings based on the Warcrow starter terrain. Both the little barn-like structure and the tower have a nice shape, I think. A tower is a great idea. And having a blueprint helps a lot. If not some other terrain around, then an image or something. My farmhouse, for example, was kind of based on this 3D model I found online. It helped me with the overall shape as well as the placing of windows and doors. Now, when it comes to measurements, I strongly recommend using inches and sticking to inches. This is not really about in-game measurements. I mean, it could be, but Warcrow, for example, doesn't even use inches. It's got its own measurement system. Inches just translate very well for crafting, wargaming, and RPG terrain. 2 inches is a great height for a floor. 2-story building, 4 inches, and so on. This makes life so easy when working, shortcutting sort of the decision-making process. If you then stick to inches, every single measurement, even half inches, quarter inches, and so on, then you'll be crafting a unified look. Windows 1 by 1 inch, door 1 by 1 3/4. You get the idea. The buildings I'll be making in this video all look like they belong together because they all follow this set measurement system. I'm after wargaming terrain that is practical to make, that looks the part and is practical to play. This is not realistic architectural models. When cutting my sheets, I came to the conclusion that all the lines on my cutting mat indeed have a purpose and are just not there for the good looks. By cutting one side with a neat cut, I can then line that up, cut an adjacent side, and now know I have 2 perfectly lined up 90-degree angled sides that I can do all my measurements from. When measuring all the inch-based parts, we got a back 2 by 4 inches, front 2.5 by 4 inches, sides 3 inches, and then try to stick them together, we can see that things no longer match up. That's because the thickness of the material has not been taken into account. Instead of taking this into account when measuring, I find it easier to just use the material itself as a guide and cut away the excess after the fact. As a workflow, this just suits my brain better. No fiddling with maths and fine measurements, just inches, and then cutting away the offset. This also helps relieve a headache if you have pieces of cardboard of varying degrees of thickness. I use small blobs of superglue at either end of the sheet and PVA or white glue or wood glue or carpenter's glue, I think I covered all the names there, on the rest. The superglue just means this will adhere a little faster while working. A hot glue gun is of course the fast workflow option. I just don't like them. Blobs of glue everywhere that are difficult to get rid of, strings of glue everywhere. But for the impatient, go for it. To line up sides in neat 90-degree angles, I use a box of matches. It's a nice small size that fit into most sort of smaller buildings, nooks and crannies. But you just need something you know is relatively 90-degree angled. And any overflow PVA glue can of course be cleaned off with a brush or cloth damp in water. Just be careful with how much water. Lots and lots of water will soak the cardboard and make it swell and such. One of my favorite wargaming terrain features is to make the terrain gameable, to be able to put miniatures in and on the buildings. So this little barn-like structure gets an opening at both ends for more exciting sort of in-game action. I'm thinking this is a rudimentary ride-through smithy. You can take your horse in one side, get the shoes changed, and then go out the other end. But the tower definitely needs more of a major change to suit this philosophy of gameability. I'm thinking a door 1 story up, so that's 2 inches up, only reached by stepladder. That can be pulled up when the orcs storm down from the north. Then more of a platform on the 2nd floor, again probably reached by a stepladder through a hatch in the floor. The tower would then be 6 inches, plus another inch for the slanting roof. Maybe with a bit more girth at the bottom to make it sturdier and look more defensible. This build is a lot more complex than the ride-through smithy, but a good example of what can be built. Now, I have no idea why the farmer would have built one of these towers. Scare of cows, perhaps? No, but it suits the Warcrow world building perfectly. The world of Lindworm is boiling with conflict, orcs streaming down from the north, elves sneaking out to the forests, and empires expanding. A self-sustainable outpost able to defend itself or send warning of an attack is a great setting for a skirmish. The tower should probably have a bell in it. Now, to make all this not look like cardboard, the trick is to hide all the visible cardboard edges. If our eyes don't see that wavy, perforated cardboard interior, it will be convinced that this is no longer cardboard, but miniature terrain. I cut half-inch strips of cereal packets, then I cut down the middle with the back of my knife, creating a cut that does not go all the way through the material. I can now bend this down the middle and glue strips to the sides of the building covering the joints underneath. It will look like wooden beams or something. For decoration, I add some 1/4-inch beams around the build and over the doors and openings, as well as strips inside the doorposts. This hides the cardboard but also acts as a detail to emphasize that some kind of miniature carpentry has been involved. And then a sheet of cereal packaging on the roof, just large enough to cover all the sides of the building with a 1/4-inch sticking out front and back. Going back to that inch-based workflow and why I think it helps is instances like this. I know my build is 3 by 4 inches, plus half for extra protruding roof, means I just cut a sheet that is 3.5 inches by 4 inches. I don't need to measure my building, I can just keep cutting. Now, I experimented with another way to hide the cardboard joins for things that should maybe have a bit more of an organic look, like a rough plastered surface. You would have seen it pass by earlier on the chimney of my farmhouse. And that's using newspaper, kind of like wallpaper. I cover the surface here on the lower part of the tower with PVA glue. Then add a rough cutout of newspaper and stretch it out. I add more glue and water and keep stretching the paper out with a brush. And then keep working around the tower with more newspaper. When dry, I can't say this look is perfect, but it gives a different texture or style that for something like this tower, or as you'll see later, the farmhouse chimney, could be worth considering to break up the very sharp edge sheet style builds. To emphasize the fortification vibe, I added a few cornerstones around the center of the tower. These little decorations, like the beams and the smithy, are indeed what makes the terrain come together in the end. And the top of the tower gets the same edge hiding treatment as the smithy. And as you can see, the cereal packaging is great for rounded doorways. It bends nicely around the cutout hole and actually gives us a perfect round look as opposed to the slightly rustic stabbed with a snap blade knife look that was there before. We are now doing shingles. Shingles is a fantasy wargaming terrain gimmick and as such must be dealt with as canon. These will shout to everyone miles around that there is no doubt about the fact that this is fantasy tabletop terrain. I'm not kidding. This is the big sell. We're dealing with gimmicks and subconscious appreciation of the expected. If we use this to our advantage, well, you can make any rickety old cardboard build, but if you put shingles on top of it, it will magically transform into passable tabletop terrain. They are a massive pain, however. I can probably say that making shingles for these builds took almost as long as the structures themselves. Now, shingles can be placed individually. You'll see how that looks on the farmhouse in a bit, but for these I'm doing strips. It helps keep the roof straight looking and is less work in the end. I have a strip that is 3/4 of an inch. I leave 1/4 be and then cut the rest with a cut every inch. This is to ensure some kind of conformity. You'll see. I then cut out random width shingles, about 3 or 4 for every inch, with a little gap in between. I then randomly cut the shingles in length and angle, as well as randomly cut the outermost edges at an angle. And we end up with something that looks like this, that I can then glue onto my roof. Now, the reason for the very first every inch cut means that even though there's a lot of random sizes in between, there will always be okay overlapping happening once you start adding strip after strip on the roof. Now, regardless of how you do this, remember, we're not after perfection, we're after tabletop terrain. Something to keep in mind, I think, for the entire build. And then, at the top, I need to add some larger bits as a suitable ending to all the shingles. And we have a wonderful little building. Pretty neat. Now for the top of the roof, like the one on the tower, the last row of shingles needs to be placed individually and then topped with some kind of bent tile solution. I mean, this is pretty cool for a box of cereal, honestly. I have to say, the tower is a little weird, kind of makes me think of a bird feeder. But to me, what is important is that it actually can fit miniatures. This creates designs that might not look realistic, but that's not always the point. We're not after architecture, we're after tabletop terrain. The farmhouse is a combination of all the things I've already shown. I did an experiment with adding some newspaper to these foundation stones for alternative texture, and in hindsight I can say this was a waste of time, don't bother. I added little details like window sills and such, and this roof was made by placing one shingle at a time. It does look nicer, I think. You decide. Now, I haven't said much about this, but it's a ruined building. This is because ruined buildings are the best gaming buildings. You can get in on most sides, get your hand in to place the miniatures on the second floor, and adds to the general pillaged by orcs from the north vibe. Besides, tabletop games seldom incorporate civilians, so there's not really any need to make sure they have a warm place out of the breeze. And on that note, no, I don't do doors. They're just in the way when playing games. And I mean, orcs probably stole them. Warcrow orcs are, they're up from the north, darn freezing up there. They probably value a good door. I mean, look at them. Darn door thieves. Told you. Can't trust minions. Oh, and I built an outhouse because, well, all the cereal, remember? Painting this is going to be swift. I mean, I did paint them swiftly, but also I kind of just want to highlight the main helpful tips and not bog down in details. First is to prime everything black and very much make sure you get black paint everywhere. I rattle can sprayed everything with black and then went in with a brush to make sure no cardboard is showing anywhere. Then I used an egg-shaped makeup sponge. The sponge workflow is described in detail in my last video, but essentially I have a moist sponge as a paint applicator instead of a brush. I dip the sponge in paint that I have diluted with quite a bit of water to thin it. I then dunk the sponge a few times on a piece of paper and then apply it in a stippling motion on the model. Working my way round the building up a varied layer of paint. After a few passes of this medium grey, we have this. Because of how the sponge is shaped and how it applies paint when you just stamp the surface, no paints get into the recesses, creating free shading and a great varied surface. I can go in with a brighter grey or even a pale sand colour or something and create an even more varied surface. Think, well, grim and dark plaster, something that's been out in the weather for a long time. Same example on the roof, this time using a muted pastel blue. Shingles don't have to be blue, but it helps. I'm kind of inspired by the northern Warcrow setting, a farmstead outpost in the northern lands, bleak, cold, and unforgiving. The cold blue kind of helps in that regard. To avoid contamination with blue paint, I simply cover the grey-white surface with a piece of cardboard when needed. Leaving the stippling behind, I can now tint other details with transparent paints. This could be contrast-style paints or inks, things like that. I make sure my contrast paints are diluted, not to darken things too much, just stain them, and paint on brown on wood details. Even adding some streaks and lines to add a sort of wooden feel. I did the same on the stone details using a darker grey speed paint, but then also decided to add some scratches and lines and stone texture with regular paint. For the major surfaces, I'm going to use oil paint. If you want to know what this is all about, I have a very thorough deep dive video on oil paints to use as an introduction and reference. But what I have here are oil paints with rather transparent pigments. Diluted with white spirit, they will stain much like a contrast paint or an ink. Only I think for this purpose, I get a nicer result with oil paint. And because I already have the paints, it is a cheaper alternative for large surfaces. A little oil paint goes a long way. As you can see, I can stain the farmhouse plaster yellow in a very pleasing way, adding some little blobs of other paints here and there to create this rough, weathered look. And because the paint does not dry fast, I can concentrate on the look rather than concentrating on trying to apply paint fast before it dries on me. Oil paint is also a godsend for weathering and streaking. I can paint on these streaks under the windows, Add green mossy stains along the bottom of the bills, on the shingles, dirty brown on the stones touching the ground, all very swiftly and without much afterthought. Just adding paint with one brush, then feathering it out with a clean brush damp in white spirit, creating organic looks fast. And honestly, without very little faffing about, I have terrific, rough, weathered, moody and contrast-rich buildings. Seeing them now, the tower looks a lot better with paint on, by the way. It's still a little surprising. All this is built from boxes I had lying around at home, waiting to get recycled. My conclusion is that tabletop terrain is out there for everyone, and it's free. Not counting a little money for glue and paint. If one puts one's mind to it, a little farmstead or hamlet is totally possible even for those on a tight budget. Start small, some little thing, keep it simple, and see how you fare. And no, you won't get that hard plastic or 3D printed detail, but you know, I think I kind of prefer this. It's kind of like the holy grail of tabletop terrain. An old cup that symbolizes something more than what it actually is. These houses to me kind of symbolize the essence of the hobby, things we make and love, and fit right in with the grass tufts, wire trees, and styrofoam hills. I hope you've enjoyed this video. A great thank you to Corvus Belli for sponsoring me in my tabletop endeavors. Do check out Warcrow, please. And a great thank you to my patrons. If you'd like to support the continued creation of these videos, please do check out my Patreon, linked at the very end of this video. It's all totally transparent, so you can see and decide if you think my monthly income corresponds with the work going into creating these hobby videos free for all. Oh, and look me up on Twitch. I do stream weekly, you know. Regardless, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Bye.